In the late 1980s, the Russian Mafia held enormous power in the criminal underground of Miami. They trafficked guns and drugs throughout the city and eliminated anyone that stood in their way. However, in 1989, they began being attacked by masked assailants. The Mafia was able to fight off a number of them, but they just kept coming. Eventually, the masked assailants were able to destroy most of their organization and kill the leader of the Mafia. It took 2 whole years until someone was able to rise up and restore the former prestige of the Russian Mafia. Let's take a look at the Hotline Miami games to see the fall and subsequent rise of the Russian Mafia. The Russian Mafia in Miami gets its beginnings from the aftermath of the Russo-American War. After America's implied defeat and the establishment of the Russo-American Coalition, a massive influx of Russian immigrants entered the US. Members of the Russian Mafia entered the country during this immigration and established themselves in Miami. They are led by a man nicknamed Father, who seems to have connections with the Russian military. He manages to get military weapons smuggled into the city for his gangsters, and using these weapons, the Russian gangsters quickly carve out their own place in the city, begin a drug trade, and even manage to coerce local politicians to cooperate with them. Within months, the Russians have a criminal monopoly in Miami, financed by their drug trade and policed by their weaponry. Additionally, they seem untouchable by the local authorities thanks to their connections in the local government. This period of dominance raises the Russian Mafia to new heights, and for several years, they have a chokehold on the city of Miami. However, at the same time, anti-Russian sentiments in America have been rising, and suddenly, in the spring of 1989, masked individuals began attacking the Russian Mafia. The gangsters are able to fend off the masked attackers, but they keep coming back. While they initially seemed like random vigilantes, the masked assailants keep striking areas of importance to the Mafia, such as weapon caches and drug dens. It seems they have some sort of insight into their inner workings, or have some sort of leader guiding their attacks. But any attackers they capture never give up any information, even after torture. The Russians try their hardest, but cannot repel the masked attackers. Eventually, after months of fighting, an attacker wearing a Letterman jacket confronts Father in his lavish villa. After a fierce battle, Father realizes there's no way he's getting out of this fight alive, and instead of giving Jacket the satisfaction of killing him, he levels a gun at his head and fires, taking his own life. Soon after, a phone rings, and Jacket realizes there's one more person left to kill. He heads upstairs to find an old man in a wheelchair. The old man knows Jacket's here to kill him, and faced with his death, contemplates the futility of life, saying, "Nothing seems to really matter anymore, does it?" Jacket levels a gun at his head and fires, killing the patriarch of the Russian Mafia. The attacks by the masked assailants have devastated the Russian Mafia. The weapon caches have been raided, their drug dens destroyed, their political connections assassinated, and now it sits leaderless. This dismemberment of the Mafia has left a huge void in the criminal underground of Miami, and in the years that follow, the territory previously held by the Russians fall into other hands. In particular, the Colombian Cartel takes over much of the former operations of the Russian Mafia, and over the years, they've begun to reach the prestige formerly held by the Russians. The Russian Mafia isn't dead, however. It's led by the son of Father, but is a shadow of its former self, and seeing his father's empire crumble around him fills Son with rage. The fiery passion burning within him can't be contained, and in November of 1991, 2 years after Father's death, he decides to emerge from the dark depths of obscurity and reclaim the lost pride of the Russian Mafia. He begins his plan by creating a new drug, encased in a green and purple pill, which will re-establish the Russian Mafia's presence in the drug trade. However, they still operate in the shadow of the Colombian Cartel, something Son can't stand. One day, he calls his most loyal henchman into his office and reveals that his frustrations have boiled over. He tells the henchman that they're going to attack the Colombians, and therefore start a gang war. The henchman is hesitant with the idea, saying the Colombians have a lot more men than they do. But Son comes back saying the Colombians stole from them, and he's not going to let that slide. The henchman still has doubts, saying this may not be the best time for a war. But Son explains that if they continue waiting, the Colombians will just get stronger and continue expanding. Sick of the henchman's reluctance, he puts an end to the discussion by asking him who his boss is. The henchman gives in and says he'll do whatever Son tells him to. The duo then make their way to Son's extravagant car, where they attack the newly opened strip club owned by the Colombians and massacre all of the Colombians inside. Afterwards, they return to Son's office, where Son is lavishly surrounded by women with drugs and money prominently displayed on the table in front of him. He wants to start a celebration, but the henchman isn't nearly as excited to party. He says that he's going to go home to his girlfriend instead. And Son realizes why the henchman was unwilling to start the war with the Colombians. He's let himself get attached to this girlfriend of his, and now he's reluctant to continue his work in the mafia. He tries telling his friend that he doesn't need a woman to live his life, that once he gets attached to somebody, that'll be the end for him. Then warns that this girlfriend of his is too good for him, and one day she'll realize it. He sits in silence for a moment, then tells the henchman that he can leave if that's what he wants, but gives him some money before he goes, telling him to get his girlfriend something nice. The henchman takes the handout and heads home in his plain Fiat. A few days later comes the day Son was expecting. The henchman approaches Son and tells him that he wants out of the mafia. He gives Son excuses, saying he's feeling too old and has been having strange dreams, but Son knows the truth. He tells the henchman that he'll let him out, but first wants him to clear out a chop shop that has defected to the Colombians. After he's done that, he'll be out. He tells the henchman that he's invited back into the mafia anytime he likes, and gives him a sample of the new product, which is finished production. The henchman grabs a sample of the pills and makes his way to the chop shop. He pulls this gun out for what he hopes is the last time and slaughters all of the thugs inside, fulfilling his obligation to Son and leaving the mafia behind him. The war between the Russians and Colombians continues, and about 2 weeks later on December 7th, Son gathers some men and prepares for an upcoming attack. He says that after this, the Colombians will come to fear the Russians and toast their new lives as kings of the street. They attack a bank which is controlled by the Colombians in an effort to destroy their finances. After disabling some security, Son makes his way to the vault, where he finds one of his men dead among the money and gold. In the back of the vault are some ghostly figures. It's his grandfather, the bodyguard, and his father. In wide-eyed amazement, Son asks his father what they're doing here. His father simply answers that he's not here, and that Son knows that, which he acknowledges. His father then asks what he's doing here. Son can only answer that he wants to make father proud. Father says that doesn't matter, then mentions that Son hasn't changed and is just like him, vaguely mentioning he won't understand until it's too late. The bodyguard then puts a rooster mask on grandfather and there's a bright flash of white. His grandfather begins speaking, but strangely, the voice he hears isn't his grandfather's voice. It's almost as if someone else is speaking. They reiterate what father said, then add that it doesn't matter since it's all the same in the end, and there's nothing Son can do about it. Son tries reaching out to his father again, but the man in the rooster mask cuts him off, saying he's not here anymore, and neither is Son. The scene abruptly fades to black. A few days after the attack on the bank, the Colombians' operation at the docks is raided by the police. With the Colombians reeling from the recent defeats, Son readies a takeover of the Colombian Cartel. He single-handedly attacks the Colombian headquarters, massacring all inside. He enters the Colombian leader's office, where he's outnumbered and outgunned, but claims he has the upper hand, and gives the Colombians 10 seconds to surrender. As he begins counting, his men creep to the windows on the side of the office, and upon reaching 10, gunfire fills the room, killing all the Colombians. Son has done it. He has eliminated the Colombians and re-established the Russians as the de facto criminal leaders of Miami. Son celebrates with his men, and during the celebration he thinks of his old friend, the henchman. He decides to reach out to him and gives him a call. Before the henchman can say anything, Son says he still respects his decision to leave, but wanted to offer him a chance to come back now that the Russians are calling the shots. He gives him the address to his new place and invites him to come check it out. However, there's only silence on the other end. It seems the henchman is refusing his offer, and Son throws his phone across the room in anger. He takes handfuls of the new Russian product to swallow his disappointment. However, what Son doesn't know is that it wasn't the henchman on the other end of the phone. The henchman did comply with Son's last wish, clearing out the chop shop he was ordered to, but during his massacre, he finds that one of the gangsters was readying a payment to the Colombians. Living in the shadow of Sun, the henchman has never had a life of luxury, but has always seen someone live extravagantly. Seeing so much money before his eyes fills him with greed, and envious of a rich lifestyle, he grabs the bag and exits the shop. Outside is a young man that escaped the bloodbath inside. Instead of finishing off the last hoodlum, however, the henchman lets the man escape, saying the bag of money just saved his life. He gets in his car and leaves. He heads home where his girlfriend Mary greets him when he walks in. The henchman says he's had a rough day, mentioning he quit his job. He says he has a surprise for her, but doesn't reveal his newfound wealth, saying he'll tell her tomorrow. He heads off to bed, sliding the bag under the bed before drifting off to sleep. We next see the henchman speeding down an interstate, blaring the radio of a new fancy car with his money bag in the back seat. It seems he's making use of his newfound wealth. Ominously, the radio warns of an impending storm due to hit Miami, and suddenly there's a flash of white and the scenery changes. The road is littered with bones and ruined cars, and the henchman's money is missing from the back seat, replaced by what looks to be Sun, except he's wearing a rooster mask. He asks where they're going, and the henchman replies that he's going far away. It doesn't matter where. The man asks if he's sure, saying that without directions, a lot of people end up going in circles, ending up back where they started, adding that this road doesn't look promising. The henchman replies that he didn't ask him, and the man wonders if the henchman would want to know if the road he's on doesn't lead to where he wants, but to a dead end. He ominously warns that he's closing in on it fast. What the man in the mask is trying to get across is that the henchman's recent decision to pursue material wealth will not turn out well for him, and hence it's something the henchman already knows. The henchman claims ignorance, and the man simply says he'll see soon enough. Then notices something is missing. Smugly, he turns to the henchman and asks him, "Did you forget to bring your girlfriend?" The henchman suddenly wakes up, indicating he was just dreaming. However, the masked man's words have uneased him, and he checks under the bed to find the money bag missing. He calls for Mary, who he finds is also missing. In the kitchen, he finds an apology note from her, saying he'd do the same thing, which, if his dream is any indication, is right. He exits the house to find his car missing. Mary took the money and left the henchman behind. Sun was right. Dejected by Mary's abandonment, the henchman makes his way to a local bar and gets high on the pills Sun gave him. He tries calling her, but misdials and throws the phone against the wall in frustration. Suddenly, people wearing masks enter the room. They were sent by the young man who the henchman spared outside the chop shop. The same young man that was spared by the bag of money under the henchman's arm. While the henchman rambles erratically in his high, the people wearing masks pull him from the couch, and one of them smacks him in the head with a pipe. Numb to the pain, the henchman continues rambling until finally saying he wants to go home. That's all he wants to do, is go home. He's then beaten to death by the people in the masks. The man in the rooster mask was right. The henchman's lust for wealth led to his death. After killing the henchman, one of the masked attackers picked up his cell phone, and they're the ones that answer when Sun calls several weeks later. Although they don't say it, they take Sun up on his invitation to see his new place, but they're not interested in celebrating with the Russians. Instead, they begin slaughtering them in their new headquarters. One of the Russians rush into Sun's room to see he's flooded the sink. They try explaining the situation to him, but Sun, feeling the effects of the pills, doesn't understand. There's a flash of white as the full effect of the pills hits Sun. The man in front of him has disappeared, but there's a trail of blood leading out of the room. When Sun follows the trail of blood, he finds the man being eaten by a demon. He fights his way through this drug-fueled nightmare, even defeating monstrous animals that have appeared as well. He caves a bear's head in with a club, shoots a nimble zebra and a threatening tiger, and destroys a giant twin-headed swan. After defeating the swan, he finds a golden gate with a rainbow bridge. The gate opens, and Sun steps onto the rainbow bridge, eventually being engulfed by the neon void. His drug-filled mind suddenly gives him a moment of enlightenment, and he understands what Father's ghost was saying in the bank vault. It was an echo of Grandfather's dying sentiment. Death is an inevitability, meaning nothing we do in life matters, since it all gets wiped away when we die. As Sun realizes this, he's greeted by cold, hard pavement. In his high, Sun stumbled off the roof of his building and fell to his death. And with his death, so too dies the Russian Mafia, ending its story. It's an interesting one. In the first game, the Mafia are faceless thugs that are only there to be murdered. But in the second, playing as the Henchman and Sun, they're humanized, and we get to see their motivations and desires. An interesting idea that comes up with the Russian characters is the thought that everything we do has no meaning, since it's eventually wiped away when we die. It begs the question, why should we do the things we do? Well, even though the things we've done will be wiped away when we die, they do leave an effect on others. These lasting effects, whether positive or negative, are our legacy, which stands long after we've died, and something that will influence people for years to come. But that's the end of this video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you for watching and see you later. 1989, Miami. The humid air hangs heavy as a large man wearing a pig mask approaches the home.